And welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're suitably refreshed. Joining me today in this inspiring entrepreneur session is the amazing Irene Agbontaen.
Got it.
Hi, Irene. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Welcome back. We're so excited to have this conversation. So let's just get started because people are suitably refreshed. So tell us, Irene, tell us all about how you started up your business.
So it's a bit difficult to see because the screen's got me split and I'm like sitting down, but I'm actually 5'11", and I started TTYA back in 2013, and TTYA actually stands for taller than your average. So I am taller than your average person in height, in mindset. No, I'm joking, but in height. And I started a brand just because, mostly out of frustration. I am 5'11", like I said, and I just found it difficult to be able to navigate the world of fashion. And fashion was kind of, at that time, very much feeding into the marketing buzzwords of diversity and inclusion. And I just didn't feel like I was included in this fashion narrative. So I started TTYA just having like basic wardrobe essentials. So like your leggings, your maxi skirts, your maxi dresses, like all the kind of like your foundation blocks that you need to build your fashion wardrobe. For me, it was like, okay, well, how do I package this all together in a way that girls like me will no longer feel like they're excluded from the fashion narrative. So that was kind of the beginning basis of it. And it's so funny because I did a talk for the British Library last year, and so it's equally important, and I want to say thank you for them to bringing me back. So the whole basis of my research and building my business plan I did in the business center at King's Cross, and so it was so for me, it was like, okay, well, how do I look at market research? How do I build my business plan? And there was so much there in the help and assistance that I got in being able to build that out. So, it's been a long time since 2013 and a lot has happened since then. But like my first stockist was Selfridge's, my second was Barneys New York. My global distributor became ASOS, and I did so many collections for ASOS. I did a massive collaboration with Long Tall Sully, who were kind of the market leaders at the time for tall fashion, and I did 4 seasons with them. And then we were able to kind of carry on that conversation and really make it about inclusivity, and then building the brand to be more lifestyle rather than just based around tall women's fashion.
That's amazing. So when you start, mind-blowing. Did you have doubters when you first started? Did you have doubters, and if so, how did you manage to overcome that and maintain your confidence?
Yeah, at the beginning, there was a few buyers that were like, wow, like tall women really can't find clothes. And I was like, yeah, like, but I think one thing that did work in my favor was that whole, just at that, it was all timing. And like, the fashion industry were really big on, oh, we want to be so diverse, we want to be so inclusive. And I was like, well, this isn't really inclusive if I can't shop here. So I used that to my advantage when I'd go to the buyers and be like, okay, well, in your store of X amount of brands, there's no brands here that cater to me. So if you're like, for example, with Selfridges, their ethos was always about, okay, we're going to be the one-stop shop for every type of woman. Same with ASOS. We want to be the #1 fashion retailer. So you can't be a #1 fashion retailer if you don't cater to women's of all shapes and sizes. It doesn't really make sense. So it's almost as if I used their ethoses and spun it back on them and was just like, well, I have this brand that caters to this type of woman.
Yeah.
You should be included in your fashion narrative, which you're currently not doing. So here's an offering for them. And if I can't find it, there's probably thousands more who are like me. So you're actually missing out on this business, which could be quite lucrative. And it was in the end, like obviously for ASOS, like I think my brand in first year for them turned over 1.5 million. So it's like, it goes to show that, your small idea that has built from, okay, this is what I can't find, or this is what I need, can be serviced by so many other people.
Yeah, that's amazing. But going back to near the beginning, what was one of your first early successes that made you think, you know what, I'm onto something here?
I think for me, it was going into Selfridges, because that really kind of like bankrolled everything else, if I'm going to be honest. You know, it's like almost as in I went in at the top of the pyramid. So it was like, okay, other brands were like, wow, like if she can get into Selfridge, which is like, you know, one of London's biggest, most prestigious stores, you know, most fashion forward, like, you know, it's not just any brand that can get in there. So it's like, for that to be my first stockist ever, I think that kind of one also alerted the press, because the press now made my brand a bit more newsworthy as well, because the press were like, okay, well, she's a new starter, she started this brand, her first stockist is Selfridges. Wow, like this is newsworthy, you know? So it really helped in the sense of I was able to really get press coverage for my brand, but also to go in at such a high, it's not even entry level, at such a high point to begin with. And then it almost is like you trickle down, you know, and then you can like look at where, and then all the other stores think, well, if you're in Selfridges, then wow, we must have a piece of that too. So then I think that's what really helped kind of get things really rolling in the beginning.
Yeah, because a lot of people might think maybe he starts off small. You went right to the top, which is amazing. And with regards to the press and getting the press coverage, I mean, was that something you thought of, or I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, like I was still such a small business, and that's one thing I'd like to state. Like, you know, at the beginning and still now, like I'm still like quite a small, when you look at the grand scheme of like massive corporations, I'm still one person, I'm still like quite a small brand. And I think for me, it was important at the big to think, okay, well, how does my network, how can I utilize what I have to help build out my brand? Because I didn't have, you know, £100,000 marketing budget. I didn't have a PR agency. I didn't have, you know, so it was literally me cold calling and sending my press, you know, relying on some friends to help me write a press release and like sending it out to like to editors. And, you know, it was very much me owning every element of it, but which at the time was so hard. But I'm really grateful now, because it's like there's no element of my business that somebody could talk to me about that I don't know, because I've, at one point in the early stages, I've almost had to have my hand in every bit of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. The whole cold calling and doing all of that outreach is scary to so many people. So how did you find the courage to do that?
I think for me, it was just like, I believed in my brand. I think the one thing is that you can't sell something that you don't believe in. Like the authenticity has to be there. So, you know, it was quite easy for me to speak about my brand. I did have my elevator pitch, you know, and it was, and I think because it was something that really affected so many women, and I think I really kind of used the ability of that fashion narrative. Okay, we want to be inclusive, but I was like, okay, well, being inclusive means, well, I'm not included in this conversation, so we need to open it out, you know. And it was almost like, okay, we're going to be inclusive, but that just means plus size. When I was like, well, actually, no, it doesn't just mean plus size, it means petite, it means tall, you know. So what about the rest of us that don't fit into plus size or don't fit into regular? Does that mean that we're not included? So it was almost a bit just using the momentum of what was kind of trending at the time and adapting it so I could basically use that as like a marketing tool for me. And I feel like that's what kind of really worked in my favor.
Yeah. So you've also managed to secure some amazing celebrity brand collaborations as well. Awesome. So how important is it for you to continue to be out there and network with your peers?
I think it's so important. Obviously now with COVID, it's a little bit more difficult, but at the beginning of starting my brand, I, like many people probably, I had a job because I couldn't afford to just do TTYA solely and only. So I didn't have, you know, much investment at the time. So, you know, I worked predominantly in nightlife, in London nightlife. So, which was a great opportunity for me because I was always meeting artists, always meeting celebrities, always meeting talent, you know, so it was an easy way for me to be able to gift my product, one, and two, I had built a name for myself separate to my brand. So it's almost as if when you see Irene TTYA, it works hand in hand. I'm not just, TTYA stands alone, but also like I'm also interlinked, and I'm the kind of the face and the representative of my brand. So any events that I was invited to, or any, you know, parties that I was doing at the time, you know, I'd always be wearing my brand. I would always be like making sure that it was front and center of everything that I did. And, you know, I think for me at the time, it was great. Like, I think one time I gifted Jordan Dunn some teas and she wore it at Fashion Week. And then, you know, when I did a collaboration, I gifted her some stuff and she ended up getting shot by Mario Testino backstage at a show. And then that went into American Vogue. So I've just been so lucky, but just understanding that the importance of really building your network, but building it in an organic way, I think is also really important to note.
You've made your luck. You've been in the right.
Yeah.
So when did you know, because so you were working and then you transitioned into the full-time, when did you know was the time to, right, let me stop my evening job and do this full-time? How did you know that moment?
Well, if I'm going to be honest, I have never done TTYA just full-time. I'm going to be honest with you, because again, and this is a personal, everybody's story is different. Everybody's commitment to things are different. I think for me, I never wanted to be a fashion designer. I'm going to be honest. It was something that kind of just, I felt like, well, there's this gap that's missing. I'm really frustrated by it. I'm going to service that gap, and I'm going to be able to like do other stuff too. So, TTYA, it was great because it isn't my personal bread and butter, but it services itself in the sense of that, in terms of wholesaling, I have wholesale accounts. I have, and the brand has grown bigger than just clothing now. So, in 2015, I collaborated with Soho House Group, and I started TTYA Talks because I felt like within the creative industry, there wasn't enough spaces where women could feel like they could connect and actually ask the questions that you really want to know. Like, how much should I be getting paid for those collaborations? Contracts, invoicing. So, we started this community with TTYA Talks to be able to like really give a safe space where girls could come and like, with live panels. We had everyone from like, say, Nishma Robb, who was like, head of marketing at Google, to Vanessa Kingori, who's now the publishing editor at Vogue, so really like women who were pioneering within the industries would come and give advice. So I kind of moved it on, because for me, TTYA, like I said, being taller than your average for me is a lifestyle. It wasn't just about clothing. So clothing was only one element of the business. So yes, I have given myself in a way to TTYA, but more the lifestyle of TTYA rather than it just being a clothing brand. So we've been able to do the talks with Soho House. I've been able to travel the world and deliver those talks as well. And for example, we did one around Coachella on women in music, and, and worked with like Beats by Dre on an International Women's Day. I did a massive event with Beats by Dre and Apple. I've been able to work with talent in amplifying voices. And I think that's one thing that TTYA always stood for. Like, my ethos when I started this brand was, I want to give the excluded girl an inclusive voice, so that now outgrew just clothing. It was like, how do we do that in business? How do we do that in lifestyles? And, even going into lockdown, I've had to readjust my business now because, factories closed and, the fashion side slowed down. But where it was now a lifestyle brand, I was able to now start a new element of the business, which was the digital, which was TTYA Talks, the podcast. And we've had everyone from Maya Jama to, FKA Twigs, and again, it was just now, how do we continue that conversation of building women, but also building inclusivity? And, my season 1 was all about Black women who work in the creative industries, because again, we're heavily underrepresented. So, just always lending my voice to be able to be like, okay, what's next? Or how do I adapt? Because things are always kind of shape-shifting.
Yeah, amazing. So essentially you're building a platform, a media empire. So tell us, tell us more about the challenges you faced, and how you have pivoted. So you started the digital, the podcast. What else have you found? Have you adjusted during this time?
Yeah, I think right now, I think with the uncertainty that's happening in the world is just like, for example, like in fashion, things have really slowed down. You'll see that obviously loungewear has kind of really taken over because people are at home. So again, my brand wasn't necessarily really focused on loungewear. I didn't really want it to be either. So again, I am lucky in that I said, well, Irene is her own entity, and then TTYA is its own entity. And even though they do interlinked, I am still like, I've been put into this influencer bracket. So kind of digital has kind of led now through COVID in working with brands and being able to collaborate with brands. Like I said, doing the podcast now has led to other hosting opportunities and lending my voice onto issues that are really important, like, the Black community and us being heavily underrepresented in the creative industries and speaking on that. And, we've seen the effects of, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and how all of those entities have now, I've incorporated that into being like, okay, well, how is my business gonna function outside of what was the new norm, you know? And I think digital for me has been really important in using those platforms and using social media now to build the brand to something else, which is now bigger than just fashion. So it's been an interesting time, but it's also given me time to stop, pause. I've redone my business plan in this COVID, in lockdown. And just, again, just really thinking about what direction, because I think when you're kind of doing day to day and like always constantly on the go, you might not necessarily always have the time to plan. So anyone who's kind of at the startup stage, I honestly like embrace it, because it's so important. You have time now to think, okay, can this work? Can I do this? Can I have that? Because when your business is actually live, it's more then becomes about day to day and like maintaining that business, rather than being like, okay, strategy and thinking ahead. So like now it's been really good within lockdown, because I've had a chance to like pause and then reevaluate. It's almost as if like the last 7 years have been like market research of business. And now I can just be like, okay, I had an idea, I've done this, it's been here, I've got this, and here's how I can quantify it. And then the next thing is like, okay, now we've built a digital space, how is this going to feed in? And then let's strategize on how we can grow that aspect and element of it. So it's been great. It's been tough, again, because, you know, jobs were getting cut left, right, and center, orders were getting cut left, right, and center. But I always try to stay positive and always think everything happens for a reason. So how do I just take what's happening and how do I pivot that to make that work for me? And for me, it was just being like, okay, let me pause. And it's been so good because I went back to my original business plan and seen how much that I stuck to it, how much I maybe drifted away. Is there stuff that I wanted to do earlier that I had completely forgotten about? So it was good to that kind of now refocus and then go back and be like, okay, well, let me redo this now. Because like I said, it's almost as in like I can use the last 7 years as like my market research. And then now actually my business plan could go deeper because I've got quantifiable results now, you know? So it's now the next level of building on top of that. So it's been really good and bad, but more good than bad.
Yeah. So when you look back, it's interesting that you look back at your first business plan. So what did you find? Because we had, you know, we have ideas, we have goals. How different is it now compared to what you thought you were going to do?
Yeah, at the beginning, I thought I was going to launch with like 50 styles. I thought I was going to like have all those 50 styles and 200 colorways, you know, and then the realness of it. No, actually, I launched with 7 styles. How about that, you know? And have built on from then. But also like categories, there was things I hadn't thought about that had revealed itself as I was going. So for example, I wanted my brand to be really like staple pieces, wardrobe essentials. But then, you know, ASOS were like, okay, well, maybe we should try going out wear, because that's kind of a bracket that you should think about. So that wasn't in my original business plan, you know. So I had now started going into like going out wear, which was a new sector for me, but generated so much income and margins was so much better than on jersey, because you make smaller margins but you have higher quantities, where it's just the other way. When you do going out, you might have slightly smaller quantities but then you have bigger margins, so you tend to make more money. So, you know, refocusing and going into things that was not really in my original business plan, but because again you've got to pivot and adapt, so you have to have that kind of contingency or contingency element to your business as well, and just think, okay, if things are not going as I set out, but you have to allow that freedom, because for example, COVID's just come and knocked us all for 6 now, you know. So how do you reassess? How do you adapt? You know, you have to be able to flow. And that's one bit of advice that I'd love to give to any new startup, in that just because it's not going the way you had written it originally doesn't mean that it's not the right way. It doesn't mean that there's not lessons. Doesn't mean that your business is no longer valid. Sometimes things happen to impact you so that you can bend and actually make your business better than you originally thought.
That's amazing. I want to quickly go back to when all of the, you know, the George Floyd, all of that was kicking off. What were the key questions you asked yourself about how you can join a movement? Obviously, they're obvious, but what are the key questions you asked about how you can pivot and what you can do to add value to this movement? It's more for people who are thinking about, going along with movements and social trends?
Yeah, I think for me that I am quite lucky in the sense of that over the years of building my business and my own personal platform, I do have quite a big social media following. So I think for me, I didn't want to get caught up in carrying the world's problems on my back, because there isn't really much that I can do about that. But I did think, what can I do to enhance that? And that was use my voice. I think one thing that I was very big on speaking out on was around that time when all of these brands were all of a sudden coming out and supporting anti-racism and anti-equality. My main thing was, over the years of me working with so many brands, I really wanted their internal business structures to reflect that they were saying it was on social media. So actually, how many Black employees do you have? How many of them are in managerial positions, are are CEOs, are on the board, are in HR, or are actually in positions that can culturally change the mindset of your business, and I think that was something that was really important to me in being able to voice. And, through that, I've been able to do a lot of consultancy work, which I didn't expect to come, but just using my platform to advocate for that as well has been really beneficial. And, and again, I didn't see that happening in the lockdown, so I think one thing that was really important, again, is also speaking out on effects of like the gender pay gap and racial pay gap. Being from a Black or ethnic background, we are free. I think the pay gap between Black and ethnic minorities and your white counterparts is, I think, something like 3.2 billion. So, when you start to look at the disparity, it doesn't make sense. Yet Black culture is now popular culture. So why are we not represented internally in those business structures? So I think for me during this time, that's something that I've been super passionate about, as you can probably hear my voice right now. But it's something that I think we need to continue to have those conversations around it, and just make sure, even for, I'm a Black woman, I'm a business owner, and sometimes, like I said at the beginning, you can't carry the world's problems on your shoulders, but you can do what you can do in the space that you maybe dominate to be able to continue those conversations or amplify those conversations.
That's amazing. Yeah. Let's take let's go back slightly a bit, because I imagine there are lots of startups now. People are starting up their businesses. And what advice can you give for them to be assertive, to be confident when it comes to reaching out to stockists and the ASOSs of this world?
Know your brand. Love your brand, and make sure that you can communicate that and talk about it in an authentic way. I think that's really important, because a lot of stuff today, like with social media, there are so many people who have literally launched brands online or just through Instagram, and you'll be surprised, like ASOS and so many of these online retailers are using Instagram too to look for stockists, to look for brands to stock, so I think it's important to have a strong social media presence. Not saying that your whole business needs to run off social media, but having a good social media presence is also really helpful to you, because like I said, some of these stockists do be like, oh, what's your Instagram? And maybe we'll look at what your aesthetic is or what it is that you're trying to sell. So make sure that your social media has a strong aesthetic, but two, like I said, being able to communicate what it is that you can in an authentic way, because stockists want to see passion. Stockists want to see that you love your brand and you know your stuff about your brand, that you can talk about it confidently, because if I can't sell it to you, why would they want to be invested in it? So you have to kind of catch their eye, you will catch their ear, catch their eye, and that's why you have to think about your aesthetic as well as what your brand is going to represent and why it is, what value is it going to add to that stockist. Because sometimes it's like, oh, my brand's really cool, that's great, but there's probably 10,000 cool brands. Sometimes you've got to think about it as, okay, well, what's the value that my brand is going to add, and how is it going to work with that stockist? And if you can tackle it from that perspective, rather than just being like, oh, I want my brand to be here, here, and here. But also, I would also say be selective as well. Sometimes it's better to have lesser stockists and really think about direct to consumer, especially now where a lot of stores are closed in lockdown. Whereas if you have your website, you're not losing orders, because again, people have a website where they can go to. If all of your, like at the beginning for me, I was only stocked, I didn't really concentrate on my website. And, as much as it was good because it helped with my cash flow, with the business, you got to later on analyze. And when you actually want to grow and look at what your business is going to be doing, you need to really invest in your own platform. And that is direct to consumer. So I think that's a bit of advice. I don't know if I've gone off tangent a little bit, but that's some
No,
of
no,
the
it's good.
advice that I'd probably give. Yeah.
Good. And it's with you, I've noticed it's authenticity. It's about knowing your voice, and that comes through wonderfully.
Thank you.
And so one thing that people don't talk enough about, or we don't share enough about, is failure and failing and rejection, which is par for the course. So can you share an example of a time where you failed, but then it turned actually to work out in your favor?
Yeah. One thing that kind of maybe stands out for me is one of my first shipments into ASOS was water damaged, and basically the supplier, from when the shipment leaves them, it was FOB. So basically as soon as it leaves them, they're no longer responsible for it. So where it had water damage, ASOS were like, we've received the stock, but it's completely damaged, water damaged, where it had been on a ship, where it had been brought overseas. And I was panicking because I was like, am I going to have to pay the supplier this? How is this going to affect my supply chain and things like that? And I don't know what it was. I prayed on it, but luckily the factory knew the order wasn't so crazy that it was like millions of units, so, and not all of the shipment was damaged. There was only sections of it. So the factory did replace it. But I remember it being delayed and having to go to call ASOS and be like, oh, my shipment's going to be delayed. And like, that's the worst thing that you want to do. Like, as a supplier, that's like one of the biggest no's of like, if you say you're going to deliver on this day, you deliver on that day, Yeah. So it was difficult for me for one of my early shipments to not only be late, for my stock to be damaged, because they're going to be thinking, is this what we've got to look forward to? But they were really supportive, and it was in the early days, and I ended up being on ASOS. I've been on ASOS since 2000 for 6 years actually now. So, it's been really great, and we've built a relationship. They've been with me and supported me through my ups and downs. And, I think for me, it was just like putting on my big girl pants and having to have that conversation and be like, listen, this is what's happened, this is what's gone wrong, and being honest and catching it early, I think, was one thing that I could give, and not be like bury my head in the sand and be like, oh, what am I going to do? More days were going by. And I think one thing, as long as you communicate and you're very clear, okay, this is what's happened, here's a solution. It might not be on the date that we've said, but I can definitely confirm we can have this stock come in earlier, maybe this stock come in a bit later. But it was just learning the art of communicating in business, which is something I think is really important.
Brilliant. Yeah. And just being honest.
Honest, yeah. And direct, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh my goodness, we're almost out of time. This has flown by. So let's go back to, if you could give yourself advice from when you first started your business, what would you tell yourself?
Enjoy the journey.
Oh,
it was really stressful. Sometimes you just think, okay, I would say enjoy the journey and celebrate your small wins, because even me just getting my order, like my first shipment to Selfridge's, I think my mum drove me down to Birmingham to drop off the first order, and I was just like, okay, yeah, it's done now. Next thing, but I was just like, I wish I had taken pictures more, or really, embrace that this was something that was really important. It was important, not saying, but just created more memories and enjoyed the journey, because you think, okay, I've done this, now I've got to do this, okay, what's the next thing? And it's like you're just jumping from pillar to post, and sometimes you don't really celebrate the small wins and don't really look back. I can look back now and think, wow, in 7 years I've done, my business has done this. It might not have got to the target sales that I have wanted, but what changes have I made in lifestyle? What changes have I made to this thing that we call fashion? What has my voice lent to this, whole influencer? Who am I influencing? What am I influencing? And how do I celebrate that? The smaller wins, I think I would definitely look back and be like, okay, you should have popped a bottle of champs for that, or you should have pat yourself on the back for that, or just getting into that store is an amazing opportunity. Just be grateful for that, not just think, okay, yeah, what's next, So I would say definitely celebrating the small wins and enjoying the journey.
Fabulous. And how do you look after your mindset in times like this?
Definitely taking time out for myself. and making sure that external noise doesn't become internal noise. So just making sure that, I think when you're a startup and you're starting your business at the beginning, it can be so overwhelming because you're so invested and you're doing so much and you're so passionate at the beginning about it. As time goes on, like, you cannot physically spend 20 hours on the computer. It just doesn't work out, you know? So you've always got to think, I need to allow time to think. I need to allow myself that time to step away from things. And it's so funny because some of my best ideas, or some of the, whenever I'm thinking, how can I problem solve? Actually, it's exercise and yoga and working out is some of the times when some of my best ideas come to me, you know? Yeah. So I think for me, it's just like making sure that I take that time out to make sure that I'm 100% good on the inside, because then I'm going to be able to perform the best. There's no point being sick and having a big business that you can't manage anymore, you know? So just making sure that you take the time just to, you know, make sure that you're all aligned and you're the best version of yourself that you can be as well.
Brilliant. What a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
It's been a real pleasure. So thank you so much to all the lovely people at home. Thanks for inviting us into your lovely homes. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And thank you all of the people who helped put this together. And thank you all of you lovely viewers who spent time with us during the day rather. Now, please do check out the website, the BIPC website. There are loads more activities you can take part in and sign up and register to. And I'm hoping this is just the beginning of your journey too. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening